At the reading of the will, my son stood up, his face flushed with rage. He jabbed a finger in my direction and yelled, "If that witch gets a scent, I'm out of this family." The room fell into a silence so sharp I could hear the rustle of paper and the faint buzz of the overhead lights. No one moved, no one spoke, all eyes turned to me, waiting for a response, as if I were the one who'd caused a scene. I didn't flinch, I didn't cry, I simply placed my hands in my lap and folded them gently, like I had done so many times in my 42 years of marriage. "I understand," I said, calmly. My voice didn't waver. I stood up and smoothed the wrinkles from my black skirt. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor as I walked past my son, his fists clenched, his wife smirking from behind him, and toward the exit of the lawyer's office. The mahogany door shut behind me with a soft click. Outside, the late afternoon sun was beginning to sink. Golden light spilled onto the sidewalk, warm and soft, but I couldn't feel it. I just stood there, staring at nothing. Somewhere inside, the lawyer was still reading my husband's will, the husband I nursed through his last months of illness, who once promised me I'd be taken care of, the husband I buried 2 weeks ago. But today, in front of his children, his grandchildren, and the attorney who had handled our affairs for decades, I had been called a witch. Not a grieving widow, not a loyal wife, a witch, and worse, no one spoke up. No one came to my defense. I had expected tears, maybe arguments over minor details, but never this, never that my own son, the boy I had raised with bedtime stories and peanut butter sandwiches, would look at me with such hatred. But it wasn't the insult that stunned me the most. It was the smug satisfaction in his wife's eyes. That knowing glance, that crossed-arm smirk, that tiny tilt of her head that said, "We've won." She had always been subtle in her cruelties. A missed phone call here, a forgotten invitation there. She specialized in omission, in polite exclusion, and I, like a fool, had smiled through it all, hoping that one day, she would see me as family. Today, she showed me exactly how she saw me. Nothing but a barrier. I walked slowly toward the bus stop, even though I knew I had driven there. I needed the air. I needed the silence. My ears were still ringing with his voice, "If that witch gets a scent." He hadn't just disowned me, he had declared it to the world. And for what? A piece of property? A slice of inheritance? They wanted me gone, not just from the will, from the narrative. And for a moment, I felt erased. I didn't go home right away. I sat on a bench near the Riverwalk for nearly an hour, watching families stroll past, dogs tugging leashes, children chasing ducks. Life moved forward for them. For me, it had stopped at that conference table, in that office filled with cold stares and legal jargon. My phone buzzed once, a message from my granddaughter. "Sorry about what happened today. Grandma, I love you." I stared at it for a long time, the only kindness I'd received all day. I typed back a simple, "I love you too." Then, I powered off my phone. Because I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet, not to her, not to anyone. That night, as I stood in front of my bathroom mirror brushing my graying hair, I thought of the will, of the promises Noel had made, of the late-night whispers where he assured me, "No matter what, you'll be okay." I wanted to believe he meant it. I wanted to believe that he had protected me. But if that were true, why was I written out like a ghost? Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. That will had been read, but it hadn't told the whole story. And as I crawled into bed alone, Noel's side still undisturbed since the day he passed, I made a quiet decision. I wouldn't let that room be the last chapter of my story. They thought they'd buried me with Noel. But I was still here. And I wasn't finished yet. The next morning, the house felt heavier than usual. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a half-filled mug of coffee. The steam had long since faded, and the toast I made sat untouched on the plate. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't even tired. Just still, as if someone had hit pause on my life. The papers from the lawyer's office were still in my purse, folded neatly next to a handkerchief I didn't use. I hadn't cried, not really. Not yesterday when my son shouted. Not on the way home. Not even now. The tears felt like they were hiding somewhere deeper, waiting. I looked around the kitchen. Every corner held a memory. The calendar still showed the date of Noel's last doctor appointment. The grocery list on the fridge, in his handwriting, still had oatmeal circled 3 times. He always forgot we had plenty. His slippers sat by the back door. I hadn't moved them. They'd been there since the night he left in the ambulance. It had only been 2 weeks since I buried him. 14 days of aching silence. 14 days of neighbors dropping off casseroles and kind words. 14 days of trying to remember how to be a person without him. And now this. I thought grief would be my only battle. I never expected betrayal would join it. I rinsed the coffee down the sink and stared out the window. The backyard was overgrown. The roses he loved hadn't been pruned. I used to tend them every Sunday. But now, with Noel gone, and after what happened yesterday, the garden felt like someone else's responsibility. Maybe that's what they were hoping for. Maybe that's why they left me out of the will. Because if I didn't legally exist, then this house, this yard, this life, would go to them. I pressed a hand to my chest, as if that might calm the tightness growing there. I wasn't naive. I knew families fought over money. I'd seen it before, but I never thought my own son would be the one to lead the charge. And he hadn't acted alone. His wife, Miranda, had her fingerprints all over this. Her silence during the reading. The way she smiled when the lawyer read that I'd been left nothing, those were the tells. She'd been preparing for this moment. Carefully, quietly, the perfect performance. I stood up and walked into the living room. On the mantel were photos I hadn't moved in years. Noel and I on our 30th anniversary. Wade, our son, holding our first grandchild. Miranda, standing next to me at the baby shower. Fake smile and all. I stared at that picture for a long time. I had let her in. Let her stand in the same room where I had poured everything I had into this family. And now, she wanted to erase me. But here's the thing about ghosts. They don't disappear. They linger. That afternoon, I called the lawyer's office. I asked for a copy of the original will, the one Noel had drafted 5 years ago. The receptionist hesitated, said she wasn't sure if she could release it. I told her I'd wait. Then I called Mr. Halperin, Noel's old friend and our former attorney. He'd retired, but I remembered he kept copies of everything. He answered on the second ring. "Is everything all right, Myrtle?" he asked, his voice still warm, still familiar. "No," I said quietly, "but I'm working on it." There was a pause. Then he sighed. "You want to talk about Noel's will?" "I want to talk about what it used to say," I replied. That evening, I lit a single candle and sat in the living room with my notebook open. I wasn't making plans, not yet, just writing down what I remembered. Dates, names, conversations. The way Miranda always volunteered to handle legal mail. The way Wade started dodging my calls after Noel's diagnosis. The way Noel mentioned, casually, over breakfast, that he had updated a few things. It was all there, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was meant to solve. And as I sat in the glow of that single candle, I realized something else. They didn't just cut me out. They underestimated me. And that would be their biggest mistake. 2 days passed before Mr. Halperin called back. "I found something," he said, without much preamble. "It's the original version, dated 3 years ago. You were listed as the sole beneficiary of the primary residence, plus a share of the retirement account." I closed my eyes, the words sinking like stones. "And the new version?" I asked, though I already knew. "I haven't seen it," he said, "but if you were written out, and it happened recently, someone intervened." He didn't say who. He didn't have to. That night, I sat in the bedroom, Noel's glasses still resting on the nightstand. His cologne faint in the air, and I let myself remember. Not the betrayal. Not yet. But the smaller things, the signs I should have seen. Like the way Miranda began offering to help with paperwork after Noel's second hospital visit. Always so helpful, always too helpful. Or the time she insisted on handling our mail while Noel was recovering. "You just rest," she had said. "Let us take care of the boring stuff." Wade backed her up, like always. "Mom, Miranda's just trying to help." And I believed them. Because when you love your family, you don't think they're hiding knives behind their smiles. I remembered the family barbecue last summer, our last as a whole family. Miranda had brought a new dessert and made a big show of feeding it to Noel. "I read this lowers blood pressure," she said, laughing, brushing crumbs from his chin. I remember thinking how strange it was. The way she hovered, how Wade seemed distant, distracted. Later that evening, I found Noel sitting alone in the garden. "You okay?" I'd asked. He'd nodded, but too slowly, just tired. Now I wonder, was he more than tired? Was he defeated? Did he know what was coming? I started going through old paperwork the next morning. Bank statements, legal forms, medical documents. That's when I found it, tucked inside a folder marked House Maintenance, a receipt from a notary service. Dated 3 weeks before Noel passed. Signed by Wade, witnessed by Miranda. There was no will attached. Just the receipt. That alone didn't prove anything. But it proved something. Later that day, I drove to the pharmacy. I didn't need medication, I just needed to move. To do something normal. The clerk, Emily, a sweet girl who'd worked there since high school, smiled gently. "I'm sorry about Mr. Noel," she said. "He was always so kind." "Thank you," I replied, meaning it. She hesitated, then added, "I saw your daughter-in-law here a lot those last few weeks. Picking up his prescriptions." I nodded, unsure what to say. "She always paid in cash," Emily continued, "said it was easier that way." That was strange. We had insurance, a good plan. Why cash? What was she trying to hide? That evening, I sat in Noel's armchair and stared out the front window. The neighborhood looked the same, quiet, peaceful, but nothing felt safe anymore. Miranda had been moving pieces for a long time, shifting the board, playing a game I hadn't realized I was part of. But I was awake now. And I was done pretending. I took out a pen and began a new page in my notebook. Things that don't add up. Original will names me. Noel's mental state declined weeks before his death. New will, suddenly I'm excluded. Notary receipt signed by Wade. Miranda managed all mail and medication. Prescription paid in cash. Why? Each bullet point was a breadcrumb, each one a trail back to the truth. They wanted the house. They wanted to erase me. But they forgot something. This house wasn't just bricks and beams. It was memory. It was marriage. It was mine. And I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. 2 days later, I visited Mr. Halperin in person. He met me at the door of his small home office, wearing a cardigan and the same kind eyes he'd had since Noel and I first signed papers with him decades ago. He poured us both tea without asking. He remembered I took mine without sugar. "You brought the notary receipt?" he asked gently. I nodded and handed it over. He squinted at the paper through his reading glasses, tapping it twice with his finger. "This isn't standard," he murmured, "especially not for someone who was fading mentally." He looked up. "Noel wouldn't have changed everything without talking to you first. He was many things, but careless wasn't one of them." That's when I told him the truth. About the will reading, about Wade, about the word witch echoing through that room. Mr. Halperin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just passed me a folder. Inside it was a photocopy of the original will, dated, stamped, signed. My name, the house, a savings account. All of it. Just like Noel had promised. I drove home slowly that evening, the copy of the will on the passenger seat beside me like a silent witness. When I got home, I placed it in the safe Noel had installed in the laundry room, the one Wade and Miranda never knew about. My hands didn't shake, my breath didn't stutter, I felt calm, more than that, certain. They had tried to erase me. But ghosts, as I told myself before, have their own way of returning. Later that night, I took out a small velvet box from my dresser drawer. Inside was the locket Noel gave me on our 25th anniversary. It had a tiny picture of us, me in curlers, him in his paint-splattered jeans, both laughing like teenagers. Tucked behind the photo was a folded note I hadn't read in years. "If I go first, remember, you are always the heart of this home. No one can take that from you." I ran my thumb over the words. Maybe he hadn't known what they would do, but somehow, he had known I'd need a reminder. The next morning, I baked a lemon loaf. Not because I had company coming, just because Noel used to love it, and I needed the smell to fill the house again, the scent of something warm, something mine. While it cooled, I opened my email and began writing. To the lawyer who had read the new will. Subject line: request for clarification and document review. I kept it formal, precise, but I attached the copy of the old will. With a note. This document predates the recent version. Please advise under what legal conditions this was nullified. And provide notarization logs and mental competency evaluations for Mr. Noel C. Send. Click. Done. That afternoon, Miranda showed up. I heard her heels before I saw her, clicking confidently on the front path like nothing had happened. She rang the doorbell twice, then opened the storm door without waiting. "Hi, Mother," she said, her tone sugar-sweet. "Thought I'd check on you." She wore pearls, always pearls. I didn't invite her in, just leaned against the doorway. "I'm fine," I said flatly. She smiled, tight. "Wade was worried you were upset. We know it's been emotional." I tilted my head, not upset, just focused. She blinked, her smile twitched. "Well, if you need anything, you know we're just a call away," she said, turning to leave. "Miranda." She froze. I waited. "I've requested a formal review of the will," I said, calm as ever, "and a copy of Noel's medical records from the last 30 days of his life." She turned slowly. "I see," she said. The silence stretched between us. Me on the porch, her at the bottom of the steps. The pearls on her neck catching the sunlight, but her eyes not quite meeting mine. "We'll be in touch, then," she murmured. I closed the door before she could say anything else. Inside, I walked straight to the kitchen and sliced the lemon loaf. Not because I was hungry, but because it tasted like something honest. And that's what I planned to serve them from now on, honesty. In slices too sharp to ignore. The email reply came 2 days later. Short, evasive. The lawyer's office acknowledged receipt of my inquiry and stated they were reviewing documentation regarding Mr. Noel C's estate. No timeline, no explanation, just a signature from a junior associate I had never met. But the delay told me everything. They were stalling. And when people stall, it usually means they're hiding something. That same afternoon, I received a second message. This one from Mr. Halperin. His email was much simpler. "Found what you need, come by." He laid everything out on his dining table: old files, drafts, revision notes, some handwritten by Noel himself, others typed and annotated. There was no signed mental competency evaluation attached to the new will. He said, tapping the folder, "That's required in this state for any late life changes, especially when the individual is already under medical care." My stomach tightened. I remembered the look in Noel's eyes those last few weeks. Confused, slow to answer, sometimes mistaking my name for his sister's. He had been slipping. And they had known. "There's more," Mr. Halperin added. "The signature on the updated will, it's shaky. Not like Noel's usual handwriting." He pulled out a sample from a year prior. Strong lines, confident strokes. Then the new one, wobbly, uncertain. "If I were a betting man," he said, "I'd say he wasn't of sound mind when this was signed. Or worse, someone guided his hand." I didn't reply. Didn't need to. We both understood what this meant. That night, I opened the old photo albums. Not to reminisce, but to remember who I used to be. There I was, holding baby Wade with one arm while frosting a birthday cake with the other. There we were, Noel and I painting the front porch in old clothes, covered in streaks of white. These walls had stories. They didn't belong to Miranda, or to Wade, or to a legal document crafted behind closed doors. They belonged to me. The next morning, I visited the county courthouse. Requested a hearing. Submitted copies of both wills, the medical records I had access to, and a notarized affidavit from Mr. Halperin. The clerk didn't flinch. "Second dispute this week," she said, stamping the papers. "Families and money, never a clean mix." I nodded, but said nothing. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about being erased. And I refused to go quietly. Later that day, Wade called. I let it ring. Then I let it ring again. Finally, on the third attempt, I answered. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice tight. "Miranda told me you're reopening the estate review?" I am. A pause. Sharp inhale. Why? This is already hard enough. For everyone. I waited, then answered softly. Because I know who your father was. And I know this isn't what he wanted. Another pause. Longer this time. You're making things complicated, he muttered. I almost laughed. No, I said, you and your wife made it complicated. I'm just bringing the truth back into the light. After we hung up, I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time, letting the quiet settle. There's a certain calm that comes when you stop being afraid. When you stop wondering if you're being too much, too loud, too bold. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of court. Not of their opinions. Not even of being alone. Because solitude, I realized, was far kinder than betrayal. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I brewed a fresh pot of tea and pulled out the yellow legal pad Noelle used to keep by the phone. On the top line, I wrote, "What I still have." And then I began listing my name on the original will. Mr. Halperin's testimony. County hearing scheduled. Noelle's own handwriting. 42 years of memories no one could steal. And under that, in capital letters, enough. Because it was. It had to be. The hearing date was set. 2 weeks from Friday. It gave me time to prepare, to gather documents, to meet with Mr. Halperin again. But mostly, it gave them time to panic. And they did. Miranda showed up unannounced again. She rang the bell like she owned it, then knocked harder when I didn't answer fast enough. I opened the door just wide enough to see her full expression. Composed, but only barely. "We heard about the court filing," she said, skipping pleasantries, "and we're surprised." I stayed silent. She adjusted the strap of her purse, clearing her throat. "Wade is very upset. He says this feels like a betrayal." That word. Betrayal. I almost laughed. "You took my name off a legal document your husband had no right to change," I said calmly. "Tell him betrayal is when you stab someone you used to hug." Her lips tightened. "We can settle this, you know, quietly. No press, no drama." I smiled faintly. The press wasn't on my guest list. Then I shut the door. That evening, I pulled out an old recipe card Noelle once wrote in his slanted handwriting, "Sunday roast with rosemary." I hadn't made it in years. But something about preparing it again, chopping the garlic, brushing the oil, timing the roast, made me feel steady, whole. Not because food fixes anything, but because rituals remind us who we are. And I needed that. The phone rang again the next morning. This time, it was Wade. I answered. His voice was flat, defensive. "Why are you doing this, Mom? Why now?" I didn't speak right away. I let the question sit in the air. "Because someone has to care what's right," I finally said, "and it clearly isn't you." "That's not fair," he snapped. "We were trying to protect you." I could hear Miranda coaching him in the background, whispering something. "Protect me from what?" I asked, voice steady. "A roof over my head? The promise your father made me?" More silence. Then a sigh. "You're going to tear this family apart." "No," I said, "you already did that. I'm just making sure you don't bury me under it." I hung up before he could answer. That afternoon, I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. Inside, a folded piece of paper. A child's handwriting. "Grandma, I miss you. Mommy says you're mad, but I don't think you are. Can I come over soon?" My chest tightened. It was from my youngest granddaughter. 8 years old, still spelling miss as Ms. She didn't know about court filings, about betrayal, about inheritance battles. She just knew I wasn't at Sunday lunch anymore. I folded the letter gently and placed it between the pages of a book Noelle used to read aloud, Charlotte's Web. He always cried at the end. So did I. The next few days passed quietly. I kept to a routine, morning walks, tea in the afternoon, updating my case notes with Halperin. No dramatic reveals, no shouting matches. Just quiet momentum. That's the thing about dignity, when you finally claim it. It doesn't have to be loud. On Thursday, I received an envelope from the probate court. Inside was confirmation. My name had been on the deed for over 20 years. Joint ownership, spousal rights. They couldn't take the house. Even if the will said otherwise. Not legally. Not morally. And definitely not without a fight. I placed the letter in the safe next to Noelle's will and whispered softly. We're almost there. That night, as the streetlights flickered on, I sat on the front porch with a blanket over my knees and watched the neighborhood settle. Children riding bikes. Dogs barking in the distance. And me, still here. Still standing. They tried to erase me. But I remembered who I was. And now, the courts would too. The week before the hearing, the air shifted. Not outside, the weather was calm. Early spring, but inside the walls of my home, the pressure built like a slow storm. Familiar rooms suddenly felt tighter. Silence felt louder. Every ticking clock echoed like a countdown. They were getting desperate. I could feel it. On Monday, Wade came in person. He didn't call first, just knocked, then stood there like a boy in trouble, though he hadn't looked like a boy in decades. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He stared at the porch floorboards for a moment, then said, I didn't know it would get this far. I waited. I thought it was just a formality. Miranda said it was about protecting the family's future. Keeping things streamlined. I blinked. Streamlined? He looked up. His eyes, once identical to Noelle's, now looked duller, like too many choices had emptied the color from them. You let her convince you that your mother didn't matter. I said, that's not streamlining, that's erasure. He didn't argue. Which somehow felt worse. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Miranda wanted me to bring this. A settlement offer. I didn't take it. I didn't need to. You think money is what this is about? He hesitated. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. This house holds every version of you, from the boy I raised to the man I buried. And now, the man standing in front of me is a stranger trying to buy silence. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I'm not going to be quiet. Wade, I said, softer now. I'm not going to disappear to make your life easier. He left the paper on the porch rail and walked away without another word. I didn't open it. I let the wind take it. That night, I pulled out Noelle's old radio. The kind with static and clunky dials. He used to fall asleep listening to jazz. Volume turned low. I'd complain, but secretly, I liked the way it filled the space. I turned the dial until I found a station. And let the music settle into the room like he never left. The next morning, I met with Mr. Halperin one last time before the hearing. We went over everything. The original will. The deed. The questionable signature. The lack of mental capacity evaluation. My spousal right documentation. The affidavit from his former nurse stating Noelle had become disoriented near the end. All of it. Mr. Halperin looked up from his notes and said, You know, most people would have walked away. I smiled. Most people didn't build this house from scratch and scrub its floors on their knees for 40 years. He nodded. Then let's help you keep it. That afternoon, I passed Miranda at the grocery store. She saw me first. I was picking up eggs. She turned the corner, cart full of prepackaged meals and expensive wine, and stopped short. Hello, she said, voice tight. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She knew what was coming. You could see it in the way her hand tightened around the cart handle. In the way her eyes scanned for who else might be watching. I moved past her slowly, picked up my loaf of bread, and left without another glance. Because some battles aren't fought in courtrooms. Some are won in silence. That night, I lit a candle. Not for grief, not for rage, but for clarity. Because tomorrow, I would walk into that courthouse not as the forgotten widow or the witch, in Wade's cruel words. I would walk in as the woman who had always been there. The one who stayed. The one who knew the truth. And this time, I wasn't leaving quietly. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood. I arrived early, sat on the cold bench outside the hearing room with my hands folded in my lap. A bailiff walked by, nodded politely. I nodded back. Nothing in my appearance said, fight. No anger. No drama. Just a woman in her late 60s in a navy cardigan. A woman who had been quiet long enough. Mr. Halperin arrived 10 minutes later. He carried only one folder. No briefcase, no theatrics, just the facts. Ready? He asked. I nodded. Inside the courtroom, it was almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that dares you to breathe too loud. Wade was already seated. He didn't look at me. Miranda sat beside him, wearing black like it was a funeral. She adjusted her blouse 3 times in the span of a minute. Guilt doesn't wear well on the skin. The judge entered. The proceedings began. At first, it was just procedural. Who's who? What's what? Dates. Names. Then came the filings. The comparison between the 2 wills. The deed to the house. The absence of Noel's competency evaluation. Mr. Halperin laid it all out with the calm of someone who had done this for 40 years and had nothing to prove, only something to protect. Then came my affidavit. My voice didn't shake as I read it. I was married to Noel for 42 years. We built our home from scratch. I took care of him during illness. I was present for every financial decision, every life plan. He promised, again and again, that I would remain in the home we made together. The updated will not only contradicts decades of agreement, it contradicts the man I knew. Then it was their turn. Miranda didn't speak. She let their lawyer handle it. They tried to argue that Noel had changed his mind, in his final clarity. That he wanted to ensure generational wealth. They used phrases like streamlining, estate simplicity, modern family structures. But not once did they say my name. Not once did they acknowledge I existed in their version of the truth. Then the judge asked one question. Was a medical evaluation filed for Mr. Noel Carter within 30 days prior to this will's execution? Their lawyer hesitated. Then, no, Your Honor. The judge turned to us. And you have documentation that places the decedent under cognitive distress in that window? Halperin passed over a letter from Noel's nurse. Signed and notarized. I had never read it in full until now. Just one line stood out. Mr. Carter often confused names, dates, and locations in his final weeks. He was not in a position to understand complex legal decisions. The judge nodded. There was no need for dramatics. No gavel slam, no shouting. Just 3 words. Will is void. Miranda stiffened. Wade finally looked at me, but not with anger. Just loss. Not the kind you feel when something's taken. The kind you feel when you realize you gave it away. Afterward, we didn't speak. They walked out first, fast, heads down. I waited a minute. Then I stood, thanked the judge, and followed the sound of my own heels down the hallway. Each step light. Not because I won, but because I reclaimed what should have never been stolen. Outside, the air was sharp and clean. Like something had finally cleared. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just stood on the courthouse steps for a long moment, letting the sun touch my face. And for the first time since the will was read aloud, I felt something that had been absent. Peace. I didn't go home right away. After leaving the courthouse, I stopped at the park Noel used to love, the one with the tall oaks and the little pond where kids fed ducks stale bread. I sat on the same bench we once sat on every Sunday afternoon. Back when life moved slower and betrayal was something that only happened to other people. I didn't feel victorious. Just restored. Like the air finally tasted the way it should. By the time I reached the house, the sun had started its descent. Warm gold soaked the front porch. The rosemary bush Noel planted last spring had grown wild, spilling over the walkway like it had been waiting for someone to care again. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood for a moment. The silence was different now. Not hollow. Not heavy. But still. Like the house had been holding its breath. And now, it could exhale. I moved through each room slowly. The living room with Noel's reading chair, still in the corner. The kitchen, where I'd learned to bake lemon loaf again just to remember who I was. The hallway lined with family photos, Wade's graduation, Christmas mornings, beach vacations with sand still stuck between our toes. I didn't take them down. I didn't need to erase the past to reclaim the present. I spent that evening tending to the garden. Not because it needed it, but because I did. I pulled weeds, pruned the roses, brushed my fingers over the soil, let it ground me, quite literally. Miranda once called this garden old-fashioned, too much work, not enough value. But she never understood. It wasn't about the roses. It was about tending something with care. The same way I had tended this family for decades. They thought I'd go quietly. Instead, I bloomed back. The next morning, I woke before dawn. No alarm. Just the sound of birds outside the window. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and sat at the table in my robe, staring at the sky turning from navy to soft pink. I didn't check my phone. I didn't read the news. I just sat in my house, the one that was always mine, and let the peace in. For once, I wasn't waiting. Not for permission. Not for apologies. Not for a knock on the door. Around noon, a car pulled into the driveway. I knew the sound. Wade's tires always squealed a little on the turn. He stepped out alone. No Miranda. He looked older than he did a week ago. Maybe because he finally had to look in the mirror. I opened the door before he knocked. We stood there in silence. Then he said, I was wrong. Simple. Soft. And somehow heavier than anything he'd shouted before. I let her talk me into things I knew weren't right. He continued, and I didn't stop her. I didn't stop myself. I didn't respond right away. Just looked at the man I had raised. The man who once clung to my hand on the first day of kindergarten. Now standing there like a boy again, lost, ashamed, trying. You forgot who I was, I said gently. He nodded. I did. Another pause. I want to make it right. I stepped aside, just a little. Then start with a cup of coffee. He followed me in. Not as a son reclaiming inheritance, but as a son asking for grace. I didn't forgive him right away. Grace takes time. But I poured 2 mugs. Set them down. And for the first time in months, we sat across from each other, not as opponents, but as people who remembered love, even if they'd lost their way. Wade stayed for an hour. We didn't talk about the courtroom. We didn't talk about Miranda. Instead, we talked about the garden. About how the porch light flickers and probably needs a new bulb. About how the neighbor's dog still gets into the trash if the lid isn't weighed down. Normal things. Small things. But in those small things, I saw something real return. Not repair. Not redemption. But effort. And that was more than I expected. When he left, he hugged me. Awkward, hesitant, like a man trying to remember how. I patted his back once. Then let him go. The next few days were quiet. I didn't hear from Miranda. Didn't expect to. The truth is, some relationships don't survive exposure. Some masks, once pulled off, can't be worn again. And I wasn't interested in pretending. She had chosen her path. She could walk it alone. I took comfort in the ordinary. Making tea. Watering the houseplants. Opening windows to let in spring air that smelled like cut grass and distant rain. Noel would have liked it. He always said April was the best month. Just enough chill to feel alive. Just enough green to believe again. Funny how I remembered that now. Not in the courtroom. Not in my victories. But in the hush of an afternoon breeze. One morning, I received a card in the mail. Bright blue envelope, sticker seal. Inside, a crayon drawing of a house. Lopsided, with big windows and a garden of red flowers that looked suspiciously like lollipops. Underneath it, Grandma's house. I love it here. No name, just a heart. But I knew who it was from. I held the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. Children don't know everything. But they know where love lives. And this house had held enough of it to leave echoes in their bones. I didn't frame the drawing. I taped it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a strawberry. It didn't need to be preserved like evidence. It needed to live. To breathe. To remind me, every time I reached for milk or eggs, that what I protected wasn't just brick and wood. It was history. It was continuity. It was mine. On Thursday, I swept the porch. Not because it needed it, but because I wanted to. Neighbors walked by. Some waved. A few smiled differently now. Like they'd heard something. Like they knew. Small towns don't need gossip to spread truth. They feel it. And sometimes, The strongest thing you can do is outlast the lie. That night, I lit a candle in the hallway. A quiet habit Noelle and I had shared after difficult days. No words, just a flame. Flickering, steady. Proof that even after storms, light still shows up. Even if it's small. Even if it's just for you. And as I moved through the house, turning off lights one by one, I felt something unexpected. Not relief. Not revenge. But rootedness. Like my feet finally remembered where they belonged. And no one, not a signature, not a greedy whisper, not a courtroom betrayal, could ever pull them up again. Spring kept unfolding like it had nothing to apologize for. The tulips came back, first as green shoots, then a bold red. I hadn't planted them in years. Must have been dormant bulbs, waiting for the right moment. I understood that feeling. Sometimes, things lie quiet not because they're dead, but because they're patient. I started rearranging furniture. Not out of boredom, but because the house felt like it could breathe again, and I wanted the air to move freely. I shifted Noelle's chair closer to the window, where the sun hit strongest in the late afternoon. Hung a wind chime by the back door. Tucked a fresh blanket into the reading nook. Small acts. Nothing flashy. But each one whispered, "You still live here." On Saturday, Wade dropped off groceries. He didn't come in. Just left them on the porch with a note. "In case you need anything. W." No apology. No excuses. But that was fine. It wasn't words I needed from him anymore, it was consistency. The daily proof that love could grow back. Even if it had to come up through cracked concrete. I found one of Noelle's old cassette tapes in the back of a drawer. Jazz, labeled in his handwriting, Rainy Days. I dusted off the old player and popped it in. The room filled with soft brass and bass lines. Full of memory but never mournful. I stood in the doorway and listened for a long time. Not crying. Just remembering. Letting sound do what silence never could. A neighbor brought over pie. She said it was for no reason at all. But people don't bring pie to houses they think are haunted by scandal. They bring it to homes. I thanked her. We sat for 10 minutes. Talked about her grandkids, about tomato plants, about how expensive eggs had gotten. It felt like a normal life again. Not because things were fixed, but because the wound had scabbed over, and the skin beneath it remembered how to stretch. One evening, I found myself sitting on the porch steps, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. The same ones Noelle used to grumble about when the bulbs flickered. I used to tease him. "Maybe they're blinking back at you, old man." I said it out loud this time. And for the first time in months, I laughed. Really laughed. Not bitter. Not broken. Just human. There was no sudden epiphany. No dramatic, "everything's fine now" moment. But one morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't see the woman who had been betrayed. Didn't see the widow. Didn't even see the fighter. I just saw myself. Lines and all. Still standing. Still here. Still in the home she kept. And that, more than any courtroom ruling, felt like the real victory. Because Miranda and her plans were gone. Wade was learning. The garden was blooming. And I had made it through, not untouched, but unbroken. Some homes echo long after the voices fade. This one? This one was finally speaking again. It started with a reading of a will. A cold room, a sharp voice, one sentence that tried to erase a lifetime. "If that shrew gets a share, I'm out." That voice belonged to my son. The one I carried for 9 months. The one I held through fevers, through heartbreaks, through graduation day tears. And in that moment, I didn't feel rage. I felt gone. Like someone had written me out of my own story. But that story didn't end there. It didn't end in that room, or in the silence that followed. Because some women disappear quietly. And some women wait. Then speak. Then take back what was always theirs. The house is quieter now. Not lonely. Just peaceful. Miranda never came back. She sent an email once, short, clipped, full of legal language and no emotion. I didn't respond. There's nothing left to say to someone who only knows how to count value in dollars. She wanted a legacy she didn't earn. But you can't inherit love. You have to live it. Wade visits once a week now. Sometimes with groceries. Sometimes just to sit. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. He brings me tomatoes from his yard. Photos of his daughters. A folding chair for the garden. Because he remembered how I said my knees ache in the evening. This is how healing works for some people. Not with grand gestures. But with presence. I see my granddaughter more often now. She likes to help me bake. She always wants to stir the bowl too fast. Splashing flour everywhere. She drew me another picture last week, the house again. But this time with her inside it too. I pinned it next to the old one. The fridge is a museum now, a map of what matters. Made in crayons and magnets. Sometimes, I talk to Noelle. Not out loud. But in the little things. When I water the rosemary. When I hear our song on the radio. When the sun hits the hallway just right. And I remember the way he used to kiss my temple in the morning. He kept his promise. He said, "You were always the heart of this home. No one can take that from you." And they didn't. They tried. But they failed. Because homes aren't made of wills or money or documents typed in legal offices. They're made of memory. Of loyalty. Of who stays when everyone else leaves. I still light the hallway candle every night. Still sweep the porch. Still keep fresh tea in the cabinet. Just in case someone drops by. Not because I'm waiting. But because I'm ready. For the quiet. For the peace. For the rest of the story that's still mine to write. So if you ask me what I kept, after all this, it wasn't just the house. It was my name. My place. My dignity. And the truth. That sometimes, the strongest thing a woman can do is stay.